Today on the program, we got a great lineup for you. Though it is August, there's a lot happening in Washington, D.C. 16 hours of debate on the Senate floor. It was vote-a-rama. Did anything good happen? Actually, yes. We'll talk about that a little later. The American Academy of Pediatrics refused to allow a group of pediatricians to be exhibitors at their conference. Why? Well, probably because those pediatricians have evidence that suggests gender transition for children may not always be good for them. Are there scientists opposed to science? We'll talk about that a little later in the program as well. And at the end of the program, a Loudoun County, Virginia school board meeting is making national news once again. One teacher resigned and hundreds of parents demanded that their school board stop political indoctrination and focus on education. We'll get a report from on the ground in Virginia at the end of the program. But first, to start off today, Taliban fighters have been emboldened by the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan and have been retaking ground from Afghan government forces at a faster rate than expected. Intelligence officials had assessed a fall could come between 6 and 12 months after withdrawal. Now, estimates are that it could happen within 90 days. Still, President Biden is doubling down on his decision to withdraw American troops. Originally, the date was September 11th, but that's been moved to August 31st because of criticism over his poor choice of an original date. He was asked yesterday about his decision, and he defended the decision to withdraw.
In just the last few days, multiple cities in Afghanistan have fallen to the Taliban. There's irrefutable evidence that a vast majority of those Afghan forces cannot hold ground there. Has your current plan to withdraw U.S. troops changed at all?
No. Look, we spent over $1 trillion over 20 years. We trained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces. And Afghan leaders have to come together. We lost death and injury, thousands of American personnel. They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation. I think they're beginning to realize they've got to come together politically at the top. But we're going to continue to keep our commitment. But I do not regret my decision.
Will anything change the president's mind? With me now to talk about the situation in Afghanistan is retired Brigadier General, now Congressman Don Bacon, who is a member of the House Armed Services Committee. He serves the 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska. Congressman Bacon, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Joseph. Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you. You recently compared the withdrawal from Afghanistan to the withdrawal from Iraq in 2011. What similarities do you see, and what do you think the result's going to be?
Well, I think the president's going to regret this decision. This is a colossal disaster in the making, and President Biden's going to own this disaster for a poor decision. What the similarity is, we had small numbers of troops in Iraq in 2011. We had very small number of troops in Afghanistan prior to the President Biden's decision for us to withdraw. We had 3,000 troops in Afghanistan. They were not war fighters. They were logistics people, intelligence people. They did training for the Afghans. We did have air combat capability to help the Afghans in their fight, but it was the Afghans on the ground doing the fighting, not Americans. And we were taking very, very few losses the last 2 years. So with a small number of troops, we were able to help keep the Afghan government in power. And we went from 70% control of Afghanistan by the government to within just 2 months, 70% of the ground is now controlled by the Taliban. They just took 3 provincial capitals over yesterday, and they're murdering our allies in the streets and going after people who wanted democracy and more rights. We saw the same thing in 2011 when President Obama withdrew our forces from Iraq, of which there were about 10,000 at the time. They were not doing the fight. They were in garrison. We quickly saw ISIS come in and take a third of Iraq and a third of Syria. And then we had to come back in to Iraq and retake that territory. And it cost us lots of blood and it cost us lots of treasure. And I fear in just a few months, the Taliban will be in Kabul. They're allied with Al-Qaeda and other terrorists. They'll be striking at America and our allies, and it will cost us more blood and more treasure to uncover or to recover from this blunder of President Biden. So I see a disaster, an imminent disaster in the making, and it's terrible.
There has been a lot of criticism of this decision, both from the left and the right. Is the Biden administration responding to some kind of benchmark? Has something been accomplished? Is there something measurable that they're pointing to say now our time in Afghanistan is over? Or is this purely just fatigue from being in Afghanistan this long?
I think it's fatigue. We've been there for 20 years. And I have to admit, there were some terrible decisions made in the past. There was the decision to do nation building in Afghanistan, which did cost us a lot of blood and treasure. And it was a mistake. Afghanistan wasn't made for America to try to make it to a democracy and make the Bill of Rights work there. But the policy we had the last 2 years was working. A small number of troops, around 3,000 troops, that were not fighting. They were not pulling the triggers on the ground. They were in the back, in garrison, helping the Afghans do the fight themselves. Now, we did have air power. And the air power is very effective against Taliban, but we've withdrawn that air power to countries in the Persian Gulf, which means it takes us hours to get there. We have very little gas over Afghanistan, and our capabilities have been greatly diminished by withdrawing our air power to neighboring countries, basically Qatar and other countries in the region. Bottom line is the Afghans have lost confidence. They're fleeing. They've lost roughly 70% of their country now. And as you say, there's new reports out that as early as September, the Taliban could be in control of Kabul. It's a disaster. President Biden owns this, and it's undermining our national security. And it's an embarrassment, humiliating embarrassment for our country. Let me give you another thing that just angers me to the bone. In Bagram, one of these huge air bases that we controlled, that I've been in, we left in the middle of the night and never even told the Afghans that we were leaving. To me, it's a cut and run strategy, reminiscent of 1975 with folks fleeing out of Vietnam. It's terrible.
What are the consequences of this decision going to be for people who live in Afghanistan?
Anyone that was allied with us, we have 18,000 interpreters, for example, which we've been able in recent weeks to get out 500, right? Any of these interpreters that are caught will be murdered. Their families will likely be murdered. Extended families will likely be murdered. That's what the Taliban does. They want to intimidate and scare the population. Anybody that had any connection with the United States government, or to a degree, even the Afghan government, and trying to bring democracy and some human dignity to Afghanistan, will aptly be murdered. I think also this makes a statement in the region that Americans cannot be counted on. The fact is, we only had 3,000 troops and they were not fighting. We were taking very few losses the last 2 years. So there was not this necessity to run. And our expenses were significantly lower because of the small presence. But what are we going to do when the Taliban is in Kabul and they're allied with Al-Qaeda and they're doing terror strikes in Europe or America, just like they did in 9/11? It's going to cost us much more to fix this terrible mistake.
Do you see a path to withdrawal that does not include Taliban taking over Afghanistan? Or, in your opinion, is remaining in Afghanistan simply the least worst option?
I think keeping a small presence of folks that were in garrison, that were providing logistics support, were providing intelligence support to the Afghans, they were providing training. We were doing maintenance on their aircraft, as another example. But these were the folk, we weren't fighting on the ground anymore. That stopped about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And a lot of Americans don't realize that. We only had about 5% of the forces in the last few years than what we had at our peak. And so we found a strategy that I thought was cost effective, protected the lives of Americans, but it also ensured that our national security interests were being protected in Afghanistan. I can't think of much worse than have the Taliban come back in. They have an alliance, a formal alliance with Al-Qaeda, just like they did prior to 9/11. And so I foresee Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups getting safe haven in Afghanistan, and they will continue to do what they did prior to 9/11, what led to 9/11. And so I can't see why the administration took an effective policy that was working, pull the plug on it, and to really make vulnerable America to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and what we thought we'd maybe 2 years we see within a few short months, the whole house of cards collapsing in country.
If there really was a cost-effective and really kind of combat-free way of just keeping the Taliban out of power and having a minimal presence there, do you think the withdrawal here is simply about getting the headline, about giving the Biden administration the opportunity to say, we ended the war in Afghanistan?
I think he thought it was politically wise to do this, but I think in the end it's going to backfire, and he's going to own the strategic blunder of the Taliban coming back in Kabul. That's what it appears right now. And then to have 18,000 interpreters that work for our country, and he didn't have a plan for that when he announced their withdrawal. That should have been part of the planning before you make a withdrawal announcement. I learned as a military guy, hope is not a strategy. And I felt like there's a lot of hope into this, the hope that this would turn out well. Unfortunately, the Afghan government wasn't prepared to stand on their own 2 feet, but we found a very cost-effective way to help them do that. We have to remind ourselves, we've been in Korea since 1950. We've been in Europe since 1945, or in Germany. And so there's sometimes you have to do what's most cost-effective that protects the lives of Americans back home. What we did over the last 20 years, we took the fight to the terrorists and we kept them out of America since 9/11. And I think we kept revising our strategy. I think we found something that was working. And unfortunately, the new administration pulled the plug on it.
Well, Congressman, it's a sobering report, but I know that you're not the only one providing this report and what's happening in Afghanistan. And we will continue to track this because I agree with you. And I think the American public feels some kind of responsibility to the people who have helped us there, because we went to Afghanistan to protect ourselves because it had become a place that was a threat to not only people in Afghanistan, but all over the world. And no one benefits if it returns to being a safe haven for terrorists again. And we appreciate your time and updating this on the story very much.